actually we start, I just wanted to say something that I truly believe in, which is that I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence, and I'm a true believer that it's a force for the good. So it's a technology which can really help us in many areas. When you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, be it in health, be it in food security, be it in climate change, but of course also in business, right? When it comes to economic growth, but also productivity. So it is our common goal, really, to actually have as much as possible adoption, responsible adoption of the technology. And that's what we are looking at, and that's the bigger context. However, what we have seen recently, if you've been reading some news, if you have been watching the telly, if you've been watching, going over social media, is that specifically in the last, if this works, yeah? Yes. Oops. What we've seen in the last maybe 4 or 5 months, right? And maybe many of you, I suppose, know something called ChatGPT. So we had something called ChatGPT that was introduced by OpenAI, and that has brought many discussions with regards to the risk as well with artificial intelligence into mainstream discussions. So now the point is, I'm sure, you are probably aware of some of them. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but some of the ones that I think are quite relevant are essentially the fact that there is this scare of large-scale misinformation, right? That can lead to manipulation of not only how we think, but also how we act. And therefore, it can erode certainly, to a certain extent, also democracies and the way we have our societies function. So that's one. Another one, of course, which has recently come to light is also the economic disruption aspect of it. So you might have said, we have this ChatGPT, it can do so many things. What's the impact it's going to have on my jobs? How is it going to be? So the point here is to say that has actually led to calls for stricter regulation, right? Which is sort of, okay, where are the regulators? Let them step in, let them do something. And another thing it has highlighted is we need to be much more better prepared with how we want to move forward. And the ultimate aim there is, when we go back to say we would like to have adoption, is that we want to make sure that the trust in the technology doesn't erode. And these kind of discussions essentially do that. So the next question you ask is, okay, so what's happening with the policy debates, right? And where do we stand? Now, you are here in Germany, of course, part of the EU, so you know that EU is actually the only sort of bloc that is coming with the most comprehensive regulation, which is called the EU AI Act, which recently was passed in Parliament, and we're expecting that to come into effect in about 2 years. However, when you look outside of the EU, you realize that it's kind of an outliner, because there is geopolitically very different approaches in terms of how we balance this, opportunities with some of the risks. And the takeaway there is the bottom of the slide, which we're saying, well, actually, there's no really global consensus on how we should move forward when it comes to regulations. But the point here is that decisions and the discussions are happening now, so it's a key moment. So let's move on now to Switzerland. And some of you, of course, are from Switzerland, so you'll know. But I thought it'd be good to just, for those of you who have heard of Switzerland just from a perspective of chocolates and, our nice watches and our mountains, that Switzerland's a bit more than that as well. And big part there, is the, oops. What happened there? Yeah, I thought it was a pointer, sorry. So the point here I want to make is, of course, we have, apart from being all of those things, very, very rich culture of inclusiveness, dialogue, and of course, which is the bedrock of the Swiss democracy. One point I wanted to maybe highlight is the focus on research and innovation, and it links to something like what we're going to talk about, which is AI. We are very much at the top of the ranking when it comes to competitive rankings or innovation rankings globally, consistently for a long, long time. We also are very pragmatic, and I think that's a word to keep for the next slide, and we do have a history of leadership when it comes to tackling issues. Of course, given the fact that we have the Greater Geneva, we also have our 2 Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, Zurich, and EPFL, and one of them, which I represent. So saying that, given that background, I would say when it comes to the topic of artificial intelligence, we are very much looking at building trust in AI, and we want to have definitely an environment which is business friendly for making sure that that innovation, that kind of ecosystem continues when it comes to artificial intelligence as well. Which essentially means that we're probably looking at a slightly different approach to policy versus EU. So how we are looking at it? It's the bottom. So as I said, we're looking at a business-friendly approach with a focus on building trust in Switzerland. Now, how do we do that? And I think artificial intelligence is not, I mean, we're going to hear from blockchain, and we're having a really good discussion there, because we've seen that happen in the past as well, where Switzerland is taking a slightly different way to go about it. The way we do it is those three pillars up top. So how do you build trust? You build trust when you have good awareness and understanding, essentially through transparency, you have collaboration and inclusion, and there is accountability and enforcement. So that's exactly the mindset. The first is in the EU, it's a very prescriptive regulation. Here we are looking at saying, well, we actually don't want to look at coming up with new laws. We would like to see more enforcement of what we have and better monitoring of what we have, and probably doing something similar to what we did, which was about sandboxes to integrate very well, and that's the middle part, the collaboration and inclusion with companies to ensure that ultimately they have the right business framework to go. Which are the points? Of course, there will need to be some red lines, and I think those discussions are happening. We are looking at what are the areas where potentially, and I think one of them could be manipulations of citizens, right? When you have mass-scale misinformation, which is manipulating citizens and undermining democracy, that's something I think we're looking at federal level, but also at cantonal level as well. And of course, I will not go into everything, but one point which we were discussing just now is readiness to act swiftly. So we're preparing ourselves and we're saying, okay, let's see what is happening. We will not go and perhaps copy-paste. We have, anyways, even when the GDPR, which some of you might know, the General Data Protection Regulation came, Switzerland didn't jump in straight away to adopt it. We thought, we looked at, and very recently we're going to have like a lighter version, which is less heavy for businesses being adopted. And we have some examples. And AI, the message is, that's the way we're looking at it, essentially in the same way. Now, I would say last word there, which is about, in terms of collaboration and innovation, I think we also, even though we're a small country, our share of voice in the international arena is quite large. And I talked about the different geopolitical approaches, right? So there are other partners around the world that are thinking slightly different in how we should approach regulation. Switzerland is chairing the discussions in what you might maybe know, Council of Europe, which is another law-making body, which has 46 member states, and they're the ones that came with the Cybersecurity Convention and the Convention on Human Rights, and now they're looking at a binding convention actually on AI. So we are chairing that, and of course we have other platforms here as well. And lastly, I'll talk about ETH Zurich. We thank you very much for mentioning the fact that we have our Global AI Policy Summit. This is an open invitation to all of you to please join it. We have the next event taking place on November 3rd and 4th. It will take place at ETH Zurich main campus building, where we bring together really experts from around the world, be it policymakers, academics, social change drivers, and thought leaders to Switzerland to hear from them what's the best way to go about policy to help us have this innovation and to help us have this business-friendly culture. And then on the same time, we also believe that we have great best practices that we can then also share with the rest of the world. So I hope I didn't go too long, but that's all I have to say. And I'm really looking forward, and I think we've got two great panelists that I'm looking forward to actually discussing with them. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Ayisha. We also would like to open the questions for you. So if you have any question, feel free after Ayisha's keynote now, but also after the keynotes later, and also in the discussion. I invite you to ask your questions and share opinions that you have. So maybe if you have a question in mind, please raise your hand. Yes, there is already one.
I think that you are aware about the difference between the regulation between Germany and Switzerland. How did you would describe it?
Yeah.
What is the obstacle?
Yeah, I think in Germany, of course, being part of the European Union is going to be subject to the EU AI Act, right, which is now one big comprehensive regulation which recently passed the Parliament, and we're expecting it to come, finalized by the end of the year and then coming into effect in 2 years from now. Now, that regulation is, in fact, a risk-based regulation. So basically what they've done is they've said, okay, we are going to have high-risk categories. Well, there are different risk categories, but the one that matters is the ones that are potentially not allowed at all, and the high risk. And there are lots of constraints and that we have to basically follow. Companies have to follow, producers as well as users. In terms of data privacy, in terms of risk assessment, and a lot of reporting that has to be done. Now, Switzerland is not necessarily following that same approach. We are sort of saying we're not going to, at this moment in time, again, it can change, please don't quote me on it, but we are not thinking of following the EU legislation and EU AI Act.
It's supposed to be advantage for you.
Well,
I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think to have, I actually am a believer, and I mean, if you think about EU, why are they doing it? It is to build trust, right? So the EU is saying, well, we have to build trust, but it's the how they do it. So at some point in time, we have to also see if all those requirements that are required under the EU for businesses, if those make sense also for Switzerland, given our pragmatic, innovative mindset. And what we're trying to say is we will ultimately, of course, go with something. One of the differences we might do is we will probably look at it sector-specific and not like one overarching big regulation for a technology like AI. We don't even want to go there. We actually like to talk about them as algorithmic systems, and lots of thoughts are coming there. And essentially, like we did with GDPR, maybe we're going to go with sandboxes. I know Canton of Zurich is also looking at that, and hopefully come with a light touch, shall we say, but at the same time something that is still able to build trust.
Since we also would like to talk about values and principles today, tell us why ETH is aiming at being a global platform for AI policy.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, because I think it links to the values, right? So about 4 or 5 years ago, we sort of had this reflection where we said, well, actually, to be very frank, because I was at MIT and I was in Stanford, and I said, well, hang on a minute, we've got ETH here, so what is happening? And I realized that we were actually at a competitive advantage in Switzerland, being European but not part of the EU, being the fact that we had this incredible geopolitical standing, and we said we could really, and the links with Africa, with Asia, with the global Geneva, the idea was to say we could be one of the key players in these discussions, and also to a certain extent, slightly different view, the business-friendly view, and how can we, so that's when we said, let's get together, let's look at how we can build, within Switzerland, an ecosystem where we bring together these voices and discuss, what we need, but then we better bring in experts from around the world, the best of the best, to tell us how they're doing it. And then we'll choose and see what makes sense for us. So that was how we tried to do it.